The day I walked through the front door wearing my new Pentagon ID badge, my mother glanced up from her yoga mat and rolled her eyes. "Oh great, another government job," she said, not bothering to pause her downward dog pose. "When are you going to get a real career, Jessica?" I had just been personally selected by the Secretary of Defense to lead the most classified special operations unit in U.S. military history. But to her, I was still the disappointment who chose camouflage over cocktail dresses. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. My name is Captain Jessica Martinez, and what my family didn't know as they dismissed my little army phase was that in 72 hours I would be standing in the Pentagon briefing room, receiving the highest security clearance in the nation and command over operations they couldn't even pronounce. But that morning, as I watched my mother return to her Instagram-worthy workout routine while my father buried his nose deeper in his stock portfolio, I realized they had never seen me as anything more than their broken toy soldier. You see, in the Martinez household, success had a very specific definition, and it didn't include anything that required getting your hands dirty or, God forbid, serving your country. My father, Ricardo Martinez, was a real estate mogul who measured worth in square footage and profit margins. My mother, Vivian, was a former pageant queen-turned-lifestyle influencer who believed that a woman's value came from her ability to photograph well and marry up. Together, they had built an empire of shallow perfection in their Beverly Hills mansion, complete with a wine cellar that cost more than most people's houses, and a garage filled with cars that spent more time being detailed than driven. Then there was my younger sister, Isabella, their crown jewel, who had followed the prescribed path with religious devotion. She married her college boyfriend, a pharmaceutical heir, at 23, in a wedding that made it into 3 different luxury magazines. She lived in a Malibu estate, drove a white Range Rover, and produced beautiful grandchildren who attended private schools where tuition cost more than a soldier's annual salary. Isabella was everything they wanted in a daughter: decorative, compliant, and profitable through strategic marriage. And then there was me. I had committed the ultimate sin in their eyes. I chose purpose over profit, service over status, and duty over designer handbags. When I announced at 18 that I was enlisting in the army, you would have thought I told them I was joining a cult. My mother cried real tears. Not the kind she used for social media posts about gratitude and blessing, but the kind that came from genuine horror at what the neighbors might think. My father threatened to cut me off financially, as if I hadn't already planned to pay my own way through life by serving something bigger than myself. The day I left for basic training, they didn't even drive me to the airport. Isabella dropped me off between her hair appointment and yoga class, spending the entire ride explaining how embarrassing it was to tell her friends that her sister was playing soldier instead of going to college like a normal person. She handed me a $20 bill as I got out of the car, patted my shoulder like I was a stray dog, and said, "Well, at least when you come back in a few months, maybe you'll be ready to do something with your life." That was 8 years ago. 8 years of proving myself in ways they couldn't begin to understand. 8 years of serving in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. 8 years of leading missions that saved civilian lives and disrupted terrorist networks. 8 years of earning medals, commendations, and the respect of some of the toughest soldiers in the world. 8 years of climbing ranks in a male-dominated institution, where being a 5'4" Latina woman meant I had to be twice as good as everyone else, just to be taken seriously. But to my family, those 8 years might as well have been 8 years of playing dress-up. Every time I came home on leave, which became less and less frequent, the conversation followed the same script. My father would ask when I was planning to get out of that phase and use my GI Bill to get an MBA so I could work for him. My mother would comment on how the sun and stress had aged me, suggesting expensive creams and procedures to fix what military life had, quote, done to my skin. Isabella would show me pictures of her latest vacation or renovation, while asking, with barely concealed pity, if I was dating anyone normal yet, or if I was still hanging around with all those military guys. Adob, Haitov. They treated my service like it was an extended gap year, a rebellious phase. One would eventually grow out of once I realized that real life was about accumulating things, not serving people. When I tried to share stories about my deployments, about the schools we built in Afghanistan, or the trafficking rings we dismantled in Syria, Their eyes would glaze over with the same polite disinterest they showed when the gardener tried to explain why the roses needed pruning. The worst part wasn't their dismissal of my career, it was their dismissal of my identity. In their world, I wasn't Captain Martinez, decorated combat veteran and leader of soldiers. I was just Jessica, the family disappointment who refused to get with the program. When I showed up to family gatherings in my dress blues, my mother would introduce me to her friends as, "Our Jessica, she's still in her military phase, but she's very pretty when she tries." When my father's business associates asked what his daughters did, he would spend 10 minutes talking about Isabella's charity work and interior design projects, then mention me as an afterthought. And Jessica is, well, she's in the army. The breaking point came last Christmas, 6 months before that morning when I walked through their door with my Pentagon badge. We were at their annual holiday party, the kind of Beverly Hills spectacle where people wore watches worth more than most families' annual income, and discussed their children's accomplishments like they were stock portfolios. I was home on leave, wearing my dress uniform because I was proud of what it represented, even if they weren't. I was standing near the bar when I overheard my mother talking to her book club friends, the same women who had known me since I was little, who had watched me grow up in that house. "Oh, Jessica," my mother was saying, "she's going through this whole military thing. 8 years now, can you believe it? We keep hoping she'll meet a nice officer and settle down, maybe use that discipline for something useful, like running a household. But she's so stubborn, always has been. Ricardo thinks it's because she never learned how to be feminine properly. All those boys growing up, you know? She thinks she has to prove something." One of the women, Mrs. Patterson, whose son had gotten arrested twice for DUI but somehow still worked at his father's law firm, clucked sympathetically. "At least she's not doing anything dangerous, right? I mean, it's not like she's actually fighting or anything. Most of these military girls just do paperwork and file things, don't they?" My mother laughed, the kind of laugh that cut through Christmas music and champagne chatter like a knife. God, I hope so. Can you imagine? Jessica trying to be some kind of war hero? She couldn't even handle being class president in high school without having a meltdown. No, I'm sure they have her organizing supplies or doing whatever it is they have women do over there. At least it's given her some structure, even if it's not real structure. They didn't know I was listening. They didn't know that 3 weeks earlier I had led a raid that rescued 12 kidnapped aid workers from a terrorist compound in Syria. They didn't know that I had been wounded twice in combat and had Purple Hearts to prove it. They didn't know that I spoke 4 languages fluently and had been personally commended by 2 different generals for my leadership under fire. They didn't know that in 6 months, the Pentagon would select me from thousands of candidates to lead operations so classified that most of Congress didn't know they existed. All they knew was that I was an embarrassment who refused to outgrow her phase. Standing there in my dress uniform, listening to my own mother describe my service like it was an extended tantrum, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not hurt, but clarity. Crystal clear, cold as steel clarity about exactly who these people were and exactly what they thought of me. For 26 years, I had been trying to earn their respect, hoping that someday my achievements would be enough to make them proud. But they weren't capable of being proud of me, because they weren't capable of understanding that there was more to life than their shallow little world of appearances and acquisitions. That night I made a decision. I stopped trying to explain myself to them. I stopped sharing my accomplishments or seeking their approval. I stopped caring whether they understood what I did or why it mattered. I started planning for the day when they would understand exactly who they had been dismissing all these years, and by then it would be too late for their approval to matter to me. What they didn't know, as they continued their cocktail party conversation about my phase, was that I had already been selected for something that would change everything. Something that would make their real estate deals and society marriages look like children playing house. Something that would prove, once and for all, exactly what their disappointment daughter was capable of achieving. In 6 months, they would learn that the woman they had spent 8 years dismissing as a stubborn child playing dress-up was actually one of the most elite soldiers in the United States military. They would learn that their embarrassing daughter had been entrusted with operations that could change the course of history. They would learn that while they were planning charity galas and counting rental income, I was being groomed to lead missions that would never make headlines but would keep their comfortable world safe. But that morning, as my mother rolled her eyes at my Pentagon badge and asked when I was going to get a real career, they still had no idea what was coming. They still thought I was just Jessica, the family disappointment in camouflage. They were about to learn how wrong they had been about everything. My name is Captain Jessica Martinez, and if you stay with me through this story, you'll understand how the family that spent 8 years treating me like their biggest failure was about to discover they had been living under the same roof as someone the Pentagon considered irreplaceable. What they didn't know, as they dismissed my little army phase for nearly a decade, was that I had been quietly building a reputation that reached the highest levels of military command, and in less than 72 hours their mockery would turn into stunned silence. You see, some families celebrate their children's achievements. Others tear them down to make themselves feel better about their own limitations. Mine fell squarely into the second category, and I was about to show them exactly what 8 years of their dismissal had cost them. But let me back up and tell you how we got here, because understanding my family means understanding why this moment was inevitable from the day I first put on a uniform. The Martinez family legacy was built on a very simple principle: appearance mattered more than substance, and money mattered more than meaning. My father hadn't started wealthy. He had clawed his way up from a working-class neighborhood in East LA, flipping houses and making deals, until he owned half the commercial real estate in Beverly Hills. He wore his success like armor, and he expected his family to be walking advertisements for everything he had achieved. In his mind, children were investments that should yield returns in the form of social status and business connections. My mother had been his perfect acquisition, a former Miss California runner-up with a business degree she never used and a smile that photographed beautifully at charity events. She had transformed herself from Vivian Gutierrez from Riverside into Vivian Martinez of Beverly Hills, complete with the accent coaching, wardrobe consultant, and social calendar that kept her busy attending the right parties with the right people. She had turned being Mrs. Ricardo Martinez into a full-time career, and she was very good at it. Isabella had been their masterpiece, the daughter who understood the assignment from birth. She was beautiful in the effortless way that opened doors, smart enough to navigate social hierarchies, but not so smart that it intimidated potential husbands, and ambitious in all the right directions. She had majored in communications at USC, not because she wanted to communicate anything in particular, but because it sounded impressive without being threatening. She had dated the heir to a pharmaceutical fortune since her sophomore year, married him in a ceremony that cost more than most people's houses, and now spent her days managing charity committees and decorating their Malibu estate. Isabella was everything a Martinez daughter should be: profitable, photogenic, and predictable. Then there was me. From the beginning, I had been the puzzle piece that didn't fit their carefully curated picture. While Isabella played dress-up with my mother's jewelry, I was outside teaching myself to climb the oak tree in our backyard. While she took ballet and piano lessons, I was reading biographies of military leaders and watching documentaries about World War II. While she practiced walking in heels for future pageants, I was learning Spanish from our housekeeper Maria, who told me stories about her grandfather's service in the Mexican Revolution. My parents attributed my interest to what they called a phase or boyish behavior that I would eventually outgrow. They signed me up for the same activities as Isabella, hoping that exposure to the right influences would steer me toward their vision of success. I lasted 3 weeks in ballet before the instructor suggested I might be better suited for martial arts. I made it through 2 piano recitals before my teacher told my parents that I had strong hands but no soul for music. I tried pageants exactly once, at age 13, and walked off the stage in the middle of my talent portion, when I realized the whole thing was essentially a livestock competition with sequins. Each failure to conform made them more determined to fix me, and each attempt to fix me made me more determined to find my own path. High school was where the battle lines really formed. While Isabella was homecoming queen, valedictorian, and headed to USC on a partial scholarship she didn't need, I was captain of the debate team, president of the International Relations Club, and secretly applying to service academies without telling my parents. They thought I was going through a leadership phase that would prepare me for business school. They had no idea I was preparing for something they couldn't even imagine. The day I told them I wanted to attend West Point, you would have thought I announced I was joining a cult. My father actually laughed, the kind of laugh that cuts through a room and makes everyone stop talking. West Point, he said. Jessica, that's for people who can't afford real college. We've saved money for you to go wherever you want. Why would you want to go somewhere that's going to turn you into some kind of soldier? The way he said soldier made it sound like a disease. My mother's reaction was even worse. She cried, actually cried, sitting at our kitchen island with tears running down her face like I had told her I was dying. Where did we go wrong? She kept asking. How did we raise a daughter who wants to throw her life away playing war games? They refused to support my application. They wouldn't write recommendation letters, wouldn't provide financial information, wouldn't even discuss it, without turning the conversation into an intervention about my self-destructive tendencies. When I got my acceptance letter to West Point, I had to hide it in my room and celebrate alone, because telling them would have meant listening to another lecture about wasted potential and family embarrassment. Instead, they forced me to apply to regular universities, convinced that once I saw what normal college life looked like, I would abandon my military fantasies. They made me tour USC, UCLA, and several private colleges, dragging me to campus visits where they pointed out the beautiful dorms, the social opportunities, and the kind of people I would meet. They painted pictures of sorority life, study abroad programs, and internships that would lead to careers in business or law or anything that didn't involve wearing a uniform. But I had already made my choice. The summer before my senior year, I did something that changed everything. I enlisted in the Army Reserve. I was 17, which meant I needed parental consent, but I had learned to forge my father's signature years earlier, when he was too busy to sign permission slips for school trips. The recruiting station was 30 miles away, in a part of Los Angeles my parents never visited, and I took 3 buses to get there. Staff Sergeant Williams, my recruiter, was a 20-year veteran who had served in Desert Storm Bosnia and the early years of Afghanistan. He was the first adult who listened to what I wanted without trying to talk me out of it. When I told him about my family's reaction to my military interests, he nodded like he had heard the story 1,000 times before. "Let me tell you something, Martinez," he said, using my last name in a way that made me feel like I belonged somewhere. "Some people see the uniform and think it's about playing war or proving something. But the people who last, the people who make a real difference, they understand that it's about service. Not service to yourself or your family's expectations, but service to something bigger than all of that." He explained the reserve program, how I could train during summers and weekends while finishing high school, how I could gain experience and prove myself before making any permanent decisions about college or military life. It felt like a lifeline, a way to explore the world I was drawn to without completely burning bridges with my family. At least, that's what I told myself. The day I came home from my first drill weekend, wearing my BDUs and carrying my gear bag, my mother was waiting in the kitchen with Isabella and 3 of her book club friends. It was clearly a staged intervention, complete with concerned faces and disappointed sighs. "Jessica," my mother said, "we need to talk about this military thing. It's gone too far." One of her friends, Mrs. Chen, whose daughter was studying pre-med at Stanford, leaned forward with the kind of sympathetic expression usually reserved for cancer diagnoses. "Honey, we're just worried that you're limiting your options. The military is fine for people who don't have other choices, but you're a Martinez. You have opportunities that most people would kill for." Another friend, Mrs. Rodriguez, whose son had just been accepted to Harvard Law, nodded sagely. "And it's so dangerous, Jessica. What if something happens to you? What if you get hurt? Or worse? How would that affect your family's reputation?" There it was, the real concern. Not my safety, not my happiness, but how my choices might reflect on them. Isabella, ever the dutiful daughter, delivered the killing blow with perfect timing. "Jess, I know you think you're being brave or whatever, but you're just being selfish. Mom and Dad have worked so hard to give us opportunities, and you're throwing it all away to play soldier. It's embarrassing. Do you know what people say when they find out my sister is in the military? They feel sorry for our family." That night I realized that no matter what I achieved, no matter how well I served, no matter what I sacrificed or accomplished, my family would always see my military service as a personal failure and a family embarrassment. They weren't capable of being proud of me because they weren't capable of understanding that there were forms of success that couldn't be measured in dollars or status symbols. So I stopped trying to make them understand. I finished high school, completed my reserve training, and enlisted active duty the day after graduation. I didn't ask for their blessing, their support, or their approval. I simply informed them of my decision and left for basic training with a single suitcase, in a determination to prove that their disappointment daughter was capable of achievements they couldn't even imagine. That was the beginning of 8 years that would change everything, though they still had no idea what was coming. The Martinez family hierarchy wasn't subtle. It was a monument to favoritism built with the precision of my father's real estate empire and the theatrical flair of my mother's pageant background. In our house, love wasn't unconditional. It was a performance-based contract with clearly defined terms and conditions, and Isabella had signed in blood while I had apparently missed the memo entirely. Isabella's bedroom was a shrine to everything my parents valued. It occupied the entire east wing of our Beverly Hills mansion, complete with a walk-in closet the size of most people's apartments, a bathroom with heated marble floors, and a private balcony overlooking the infinity pool. Her walls were covered with framed photos of her achievements: homecoming queen, prom queen, sorority president, dean's list certificates, and glamorous shots from her engagement to Marcus Blackwell III, heir to Blackwell Pharmaceuticals. Each photo was professionally mounted and lit like artwork in a gallery. My bedroom, by contrast, was the smallest upstairs room, tucked away at the end of the hall like an afterthought. When I complained about the size difference as a kid, my father explained that Isabella needed more space for her, quote, activities and social obligations, while I was too busy with sports and books to appreciate nice things anyway. The message was clear. Isabella's comfort mattered, because Isabella mattered. The financial disparity was even more obvious. Isabella received a monthly allowance of $3,000 throughout high school and college, ostensibly for clothing, entertainment, and social necessities. This was in addition to her credit cards, which had no spending limits, and her car, a brand new BMW convertible that my father had surprised her with on her 16th birthday. When I asked why I didn't get the same allowance, my mother explained that Isabella had social responsibilities that required proper funding, while I was more of a scholarship type who should learn the value of earning my own money. So I did. I started babysitting at 13, worked at a local gym at 15, and spent my summers lifeguarding at the country club where my parents were members. I saved every dollar I earned, not because I was naturally frugal, but because I knew that unlike Isabella, I couldn't count on family money to cushion my choices. Watching my parents fund Isabella's every whim while making me work for spending money taught me early that in the Martinez household, support was a privilege reserved for the golden child. The academic expectations were equally skewed. When Isabella brought home a B- in calculus, my parents hired her a private tutor and celebrated when she managed to raise it to a B+. When I brought home straight A's, it was met with a casual good job and an immediate pivot to discussing Isabella's latest accomplishment. My parents attended every single one of Isabella's volleyball games, even the away matches that required 2-hour drives, but missed most of my debate tournaments because they conflicted with social events or business meetings. I remember the night of the regional debate championships, where I was competing for a spot at the state level. It was the biggest academic competition of my junior year, and I had been preparing for months. Isabella had a sorority mixer the same evening, not a competition, not an important event, just a casual social gathering. My parents chose to drive Isabella to USC for her mixer rather than attend my debate, explaining that Isabella needs support for her social development, while I was naturally competitive and would do fine without them. I won the regional championship and qualified for state. They weren't there to see it. The social treatment was perhaps the most telling aspect of their favoritism. Isabella's friends were always welcome in our house. They had pool parties, sleepovers, and dinner gatherings that my mother would cater like formal events. My parents knew all of Isabella's friends by name, asked about their families, and treated them like extensions of their own social circle. These girls came from the right families. attended the right schools, and dated the right boys. They represented the kind of connections my parents valued. My friends, when I was allowed to have them over, were treated with polite indifference at best. My debate team partners were too intense for casual conversation. My martial arts training partners were too rough for the delicate furniture. My study group friends were too academic to be interesting at dinner parties. The message was clear. My interests attracted the wrong kind of people, while Isabella's interests attracted future network connections. The gift disparity during holidays was almost comical in its obviousness. Christmas mornings looked like a retail explosion in Isabella's corner of the living room. Designer handbags, jewelry, electronics, clothes from boutiques that required appointments to shop. My pile was smaller, more practical, and often included items I had specifically requested for practical purposes: books, sports equipment, or electronics for schoolwork. When I pointed out the difference, my mother would explain that Isabella appreciated beautiful things, while I was more interested in useful things, as if my preferences had naturally evolved toward practicality, rather than being shaped by years of receiving practical gifts while watching Isabella unwrap luxuries. But the most painful aspect of their favoritism wasn't the material inequality, it was the emotional investment. My parents spoke about Isabella's future with the kind of excitement usually reserved for winning lottery tickets. They discussed her wedding plans for years before Marcus proposed, debated the merits of different venues, and planned a celebration that would properly showcase the Martinez family's success. They talked about the grandchildren Isabella would give them, the social connections her marriage would bring, and the ways her life would enhance their own status. When they talked about my future, which was rare, it was always framed as damage control. They worried about my unmarketable interests, my resistance to their guidance, and my tendency to choose difficult paths. They didn't envision my success. They feared my failure and how it might reflect on them. The difference was obvious to everyone, including Isabella herself. Isabella, to her credit, hadn't asked to be the golden child, but she had learned to leverage her status with ruthless efficiency. She knew that tears could unlock any spending limit, that strategic helplessness could summon immediate parental assistance, and that her happiness was the family's primary concern. She wasn't malicious about her advantages, but she wasn't exactly generous with them either. When I needed help with anything, rides to events, financial assistance for school activities, or simply parental attention, Isabella's needs always took priority. If she had a social conflict that required parental intervention, my debate tournament or academic competition would have to manage without family support. If she needed emotional support for some minor social drama, my actual problems would be dismissed as manageable because I was more independent and less sensitive than Isabella. The underlying message was always the same. Isabella's emotional well-being was precious and required careful tending, while my emotional well-being was sturdy enough to withstand neglect. Isabella's dreams were family investments worthy of unlimited funding and support, while my dreams were expensive hobbies that I needed to finance myself. This dynamic became so normalized that I stopped expecting equal treatment and started measuring success by my ability to achieve things without family support. I became fiercely independent not because I was naturally self-reliant, but because I had learned that relying on my family meant accepting their judgment that I was worth less investment than Isabella. The breaking point came during my senior year when both Isabella and I had major events on the same weekend. Isabella was competing in a regional pageant that could qualify her for Miss California preliminaries. I was competing in the state debate championship that could earn me a full scholarship to several universities. Both events were important, both required family support, and both were scheduled for the same Saturday afternoon. My parents didn't even pretend to consider splitting up to attend both events. The family would attend Isabella's pageant as a unit because, according to my mother, pageants require family presence for emotional support, while debates are individual competitions where family attendance doesn't affect performance. The logic was flawless if you started from the premise that Isabella's needs were more important than mine. Isabella won her regional pageant and went on to place third in Miss California preliminaries. I won the state championship and earned a full scholarship to 3 different universities. Isabella's victory was celebrated with a family dinner at the most expensive restaurant in Beverly Hills. complete with champagne toasts and calls to extended family. My victory was acknowledged with a congratulatory card and a promise that we would celebrate later when things weren't so busy with Isabella's pageant preparation. That night, lying in my small bedroom while listening to Isabella celebrate with friends in her suite across the hall, I understood something fundamental about my family that I had been too young to articulate before. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was an accessory, a supporting character in Isabella's story, a backup plan in case their primary investment didn't pan out. They had never seen me as an individual worthy of their dreams and schemes because they had decided before I was old enough to have opinions that Isabella would be their masterpiece, and I would be their insurance policy. This realization didn't make me angry, it made me determined. If I was going to be treated like an investment that required no funding and offered no returns, then I would become an investment that paid dividends they never expected. I would build a life so successful, so undeniably impressive, that their failure to recognize my worth would become their loss, not mine. I just had no idea how dramatically that determination would eventually reshape everything they thought they knew about success, failure, and which daughter had actually been worth their attention all along. The pattern of giving everything while receiving nothing started long before I ever put on a uniform. It began with small sacrifices that seemed insignificant at the time but created a blueprint for how I would spend the next decade of my life, pouring myself into other people's success, while my own achievements went unnoticed and unappreciated. During high school, I became the family's unofficial problem solver. When Isabella struggled with her college application essays, I spent 3 weeks helping her craft the perfect personal statement for USC. I researched scholarship opportunities she qualified for, organized her community service documentation, and even coached her through practice interviews. When she got accepted with a partial merit scholarship, my parents threw her a celebration party and never mentioned the hours I had invested in making her application competitive. When my father's business hit a rough patch during the 2008 recession, I was the one who suggested he diversify into commercial property management rather than just sales. I had spent months researching market trends and economic forecasts for my AP economics class, and I shared my findings with him over dinner one night. He implemented my suggestions, which helped him weather the downturn, while many of his competitors went bankrupt. 2 years later, when his business had not only recovered but expanded, he attributed his success to his, quote, natural business instincts and, quote, ability to adapt. My research never came up. I tutored Isabella through calculus, statistics, and economics during her junior and senior years, spending countless evenings at the kitchen table walking her through problems she couldn't solve on her own. When she graduated with a 3.8 GPA, my parents credited her natural intelligence and strong work ethic. When I graduated valedictorian with a 4.0 GPA while working 20 hours a week and maintaining 3 extracurricular activities, they mentioned it briefly at dinner and moved on to discussing Isabella's sorority rush preparations. The financial contributions began in college, even though I was the one on partial scholarships and student loans, while Isabella's education was fully funded by our parents. During my sophomore year at UCLA, where I was studying international relations and Arabic, my mother called me in tears. Isabella's sorority dues had increased unexpectedly, and Marcus's father had made some comments about the importance of his future daughter-in-law being involved in the right organizations. Isabella needed an additional $3,000 for sorority fees, and my parents were temporarily cash poor due to a delayed real estate transaction. I had $3,500 in my savings account, money I had earned working at a translation service and planned to use for a summer study abroad program in Jordan. Without hesitation, I transferred the money to Isabella's account and told my parents not to worry about paying me back. I spent that summer taking additional classes instead of studying abroad, but Isabella's sorority status remained intact, which was apparently what mattered most. The pattern escalated after I graduated and enlisted active duty. My military salary wasn't substantial, especially as a junior enlisted soldier, but it was steady, and I had minimal expenses on base. Meanwhile, my family's lifestyle inflation had outpaced their income growth. My father's real estate empire looked impressive from the outside, but maintaining their Beverly Hills mansion, Isabella's wedding preparations, and my mother's social obligations required constant cash flow. They never directly asked me for money, but they made sure I understood their financial pressures. My mother would mention during our phone calls how expensive Isabella's wedding planning had become, how the venue costs had tripled since they signed the initial contract, how the florist required additional payment up front. My father would discuss his temporary liquidity issues and how certain investment opportunities required immediate capital that he didn't have readily available. I started sending home $500 a month, then $1,000, then whatever I could spare after covering my basic expenses. I told myself it was temporary, that I was helping my family through a difficult period, that they would appreciate my support when things improved. I convinced myself that contributing to Isabella's wedding was an investment in family unity, that helping my father with cash flow was supporting the business that had provided for all of us. For 2 years, I sent money home while living in base housing, eating at the DFAC, and driving a used Honda Civic that I had bought with cash from my enlistment bonus. I wore the same 3 civilian outfits on rotation during my off-duty time and hadn't bought new clothes in months. I skipped dinners out with fellow soldiers because I couldn't afford the extra expense, and I declined invitations to visit friends' families during holidays because I couldn't afford the travel costs. During this time, Isabella's Instagram feed was a continuous showcase of luxury, designer handbags, spa weekends, European vacations with Marcus, and elaborate engagement celebrations. My mother's social media presence featured photos from charity galas, wine country retreats, and home renovations that seemed to happen every few months. My father bought himself a new Porsche and justified it as a business investment for client meetings. None of them ever asked how I was managing financially. None of them seemed to consider that my military salary might not leave much room for personal expenses after sending money home. They had accepted my contributions as a natural extension of my personality. Responsible, practical Jessica helping out the family like she always did. The financial support increased when I made sergeant and my pay improved. Instead of reducing my monthly contributions, my family's needs seemed to expand to match my increased ability to help. Isabella's wedding had evolved from an elegant local celebration to a destination event in Napa Valley. My mother had decided to remodel the kitchen and master bathroom simultaneously. My father needed additional capital for a commercial property investment that required immediate action. By my 4th year of service, I was sending home nearly $2,000 a month while living like a monk myself. I had been deployed twice, to Afghanistan and Iraq, and my combat pay was entirely untaxed, which meant I could afford to be even more generous with my family. I sent money for Isabella's honeymoon, my mother's cosmetic procedures, and my father's business expansions. During my deployment to Afghanistan, I spent my off-duty time teaching English to local children and learning Dari from our interpreters, but I also spent hours managing my family's financial requests via email. Isabella needed help with her first apartment security deposit. My mother wanted to surprise my father with a new watch for their anniversary. My father had an opportunity to buy a distressed property but needed quick cash for the down payment. I wired money from Bagram Airfield while mortars fell on the base perimeter. I authorized bank transfers between patrols and raids. I managed my family's financial emergencies between missions that could have ended my life. The irony wasn't lost on me, but it didn't change my behavior. I kept giving because that's what I had always done, and they kept taking because that's what they had always done. When I returned from my second deployment, I had saved enough money to buy a house. Not a mansion like my parents, but a modest 3-bedroom home near Fort Campbell where I was stationed. I was excited about the prospect of homeownership, about having something tangible to show for my years of service and sacrifice. 2 weeks before I was scheduled to sign the purchase agreement, my father called with an urgent request. A commercial property he had been negotiating to buy was about to be sold to another buyer unless he could provide an additional $25,000 in earnest money within 48 hours. The property was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that would set the family up for generational wealth. He needed my help to secure the deal. I canceled my house purchase and wired him the money I had saved for my down payment. The property deal went through, and my father's investment portfolio expanded again. 6 months later, he sold the property for a $200,000 profit. When I asked about repayment of my $25,000 contribution, he seemed genuinely surprised. "Jessica, that was a family investment," he said. We all benefit when the family business succeeds. You'll get your share when the time comes. The time never came, of course, because there was always another opportunity, another emergency, another situation where responsible Jessica could help out her family. I had become their personal bank, funding their lifestyle improvements while postponing my own life indefinitely. I continued living in base housing and driving my used Honda while they renovated their pool area and bought Isabella a new Range Rover as a first anniversary gift. I ate cafeteria food and shopped at the commissary while they dined at Michelin-starred restaurants and vacationed in Europe. I sent money home like clockwork while they treated my contributions as an entitlement rather than a sacrifice. The most painful part wasn't the money itself. It was the complete lack of acknowledgement for what I was giving up to help them. They never thanked me for my contributions, never recognized the lifestyle sacrifices I was making, never seemed to consider that I might have my own dreams and goals that required financial resources. To them, I was simply doing what Jessica did, being responsible, practical, and selfless in service of the family's greater good. The fact that the family's greater good never seemed to include my own well-being was apparently irrelevant to the equation. The moment that shattered my last illusion about my family's respect happened on a humid Tuesday evening in July, during my brief leave between deployments. I had been back from Iraq for exactly 6 days, still adjusting to sleeping without the sound of generators and helicopters, still flinching at sudden noises that reminded me of incoming mortars. I was scheduled to deploy to Syria in 3 weeks for a classified mission that I couldn't discuss with anyone, including my family. That evening, I had driven to their house after spending the day at the VA hospital visiting wounded soldiers from my unit. Sergeant Williams had lost his left leg to an IED, and Private Chen was learning to write with his non-dominant hand after shrapnel damaged the nerves in his right arm. I was emotionally drained and looking forward to a quiet family dinner. Maybe some normal conversation that didn't involve casualty reports or mission briefings. Instead, I walked into what felt like a celebration I hadn't been invited to. Isabella was there with Marcus and his parents, the Blackwells, along with my mother's sister Carmen and her husband David. Everyone was dressed like they were attending a country club event, and the dining room was set with my mother's best china and crystal. I was wearing jeans and a simple blouse, having come directly from the hospital, and I felt immediately underdressed for whatever occasion I had apparently interrupted. "Jessica!" my mother called out brightly as I appeared in the doorway. "Perfect timing! We're just celebrating Marcus's promotion to Vice President of Business Development. Isn't that wonderful?" Marcus stood up and shook my hand with the kind of firm grip that men use when they want to establish dominance. "Jessica, good to see you. Isabella tells me you're still doing the military thing. That's really dedicated of you." The way he said dedicated made it sound like a character flaw. Isabella beamed as she showed off a new diamond bracelet that Marcus had apparently given her to celebrate his promotion. "It's a Cartier," she said, extending her wrist so everyone could admire it. Marcus said every vice president's wife should have proper jewelry for company events. Mrs. Blackwell, a woman who had never worked a day in her life but considered herself an expert on career advancement, turned to me with the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And what about you, dear? Any promotions coming your way?" I had actually been promoted to staff sergeant 2 months earlier, a significant achievement that had come with increased responsibilities and leadership of a 12-person squad. But before I could answer, my father jumped in with his own interpretation of my career trajectory. "Jessica's doing well in her position," he said carefully. "She's very responsible, always has been. The military appreciates that kind of reliability." Reliability. Like I was a piece of office equipment that showed up on time and performed basic functions without complaint. Carmen, who had always been competitive with my mother and loved stirring up family drama, leaned forward with interest. "How long has it been now, Jessica? 6 years? 7? When do you think you'll be ready to transition to something more permanent?" The conversation that followed revealed everything I needed to know about how my family truly viewed my service. To them, my military career wasn't a profession. It was an extended phase, like Isabella's brief interest in vegetarianism or my mother's short-lived pottery hobby. They spoke about my deployments like they were summer camps, my combat experience like it was team-building exercises, and my leadership responsibilities like they were volunteer work that looked good on a resume. Marcus, emboldened by wine and his captive audience, began sharing his thoughts on military service with the authority of someone who had never been closer to combat than Call of Duty. "The thing about the military," he said, gesturing with his glass, "is that it's really a stepping stone, you know? Great for discipline and structure, but at some point, you have to join the real world and start building actual wealth." "Exactly," agreed David, who worked in corporate finance and considered himself an expert on all forms of employment. "Military service is admirable, but it's not a long-term career strategy. The real money is in private sector, where performance actually matters." I sat there listening to them discuss my life like I wasn't in the room, my fists clenched under the table as they reduced 8 years of service, 2 combat deployments, and a security clearance that had taken months to obtain into a character-building exercise that I should eventually outgrow. The worst part was watching my parents nod along with these assessments. My mother actually agreed that military service was wonderful for young people, but that I was probably ready to settle down and find something more stable. My father suggested that my leadership experience would translate well to entry-level management positions in civilian companies. Entry-level. After 8 years of service, multiple deployments and responsibilities that these people couldn't begin to comprehend, they saw me as qualified for entry-level positions. Isabella, perhaps sensing that the conversation was becoming uncomfortable, tried to steer it in a different direction. "Well, I think what Jessica does is really brave," she said with the kind of patronizing tone usually reserved for small children. "Not everyone can handle all that roughness. But Jessica's always been tough. Remember when we were kids and she used to climb trees and play in the dirt? She was never afraid of getting messy." Getting messy. As if my service was an extension of childhood tomboy behavior rather than a serious profession that required intelligence, skill, and courage. Mrs. Blackwell seized on this characterization with obvious relief. "Oh yes, some people are just naturally suited for more physical careers. It's wonderful that there are opportunities for different types of people to contribute in their own ways." Different types of people. The condescension was so thick I could taste it. But the conversation that truly broke something inside me happened after dinner, when I was in the kitchen helping my mother load the dishwasher while the others moved to the living room for coffee and dessert. I thought we might have a moment of genuine connection, maybe a chance for her to acknowledge what I had been through, or express some pride in my accomplishments. Instead, she used the privacy to express her real concerns about my life choices. "Jessica, honey," she began in the tone she used when she was about to deliver criticism disguised as concern, "I've been thinking about your situation, and I'm worried that you're limiting your options by staying in the military so long." "My situation?" I asked, genuinely confused about what she meant. "Your dating life, sweetheart. You're 28 years old, and you haven't had a serious relationship since high school. How are you supposed to meet someone suitable when you're surrounded by, well, soldiers all the time?" "Soldiers?" She said it like I was surrounded by criminals or drug addicts. "Mom, I've dated plenty. I just haven't found the right person yet." "But that's exactly my point," she continued, warming to her theme. "The right person isn't going to be someone from your current environment. Men like Marcus, men with real careers and family connections, they don't typically marry military women. It's just not compatible with their lifestyle expectations." I stared at her, trying to process what she was actually saying. "Are you telling me that you think my career makes me unmarriageable?" "Not unmarriageable," she corrected quickly, "just limiting your pool of potential partners to a certain type. And frankly, Jessica, you deserve better than some soldier who's going to drag you from base to base for the rest of your life. You could do so much more if you just gave yourself the chance." At that moment, Carmen appeared in the kitchen doorway, having clearly been listening to our conversation. "You know, Jessica," she said with the fake concern that was her specialty, "Vivian has a point. My friend Linda's daughter was in the Air Force for a few years, and when she got out, she had such a hard time adjusting to normal life. All that military training makes women so aggressive. Men don't really like that in a wife." My mother nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. And the longer you stay in, the harder it becomes to adapt to civilian expectations. Look at Isabella. She's built a beautiful life with Marcus, because she understood how to be the kind of woman that successful men want to marry." I looked through the kitchen doorway at Isabella, who was laughing at something Mr. Blackwell had said while Marcus's hand rested possessively on her shoulder. She looked beautiful, polished, and completely content with her role as an attractive accessory to her husband's success. Everything about her body language suggested that she had found her purpose in life by making herself indispensable to Marcus's image and comfort. "Is that what you want from me?" I asked my mother quietly. "To find a man who will support me financially in exchange for making him look good at company parties." "I want you to be happy," she said, but her tone suggested that happiness had a very specific definition that didn't include military service. "And I want you to have security, real security, not the kind that depends on government budgets and political decisions." Carmen nodded sagely. "Military benefits can be cut at any time. But a good marriage to the right man? That's security you can count on." Standing in that kitchen, listening to my mother and aunt discuss my life like it was a failed business venture that needed to be restructured, I realized that they had never seen my military service as legitimate work. To them, I was playing dress-up in camouflage while waiting for a man to rescue me from my delusions of independence. They had no idea that I was 3 weeks away from leading a classified mission in Syria. They didn't know that I had already been selected for officer candidate school and was on track for a promotion that would put me in command of a specialized unit. They couldn't comprehend that I had built a career based on competence and leadership rather than appearance and compliance. Most importantly, they had no idea that while they were discussing my need to find a husband for financial security, I had already been quietly building something that would make their real estate empire look like a child's game of Monopoly. But that night, as I drove back to base listening to them mock everything I had worked for, I made a decision that would change everything. I stopped caring what they thought of my choices, and I started planning for the day when their opinions would become completely irrelevant to my success. What my family didn't know, as they sat in that Beverly Hills dining room discussing my need to find a husband for financial security, was that 6 months earlier I had received a phone call that changed everything. The call came at 0600 hours on a Tuesday morning while I was running PT with my squad at Fort Campbell. My phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was 202, Washington, D.C. "Staff Sergeant Martinez, this is Colonel Patricia Hayes from the Pentagon's Special Operations Command. I need you to report to my office at 1400 hours on Thursday for a classified briefing. You are not to discuss this call with anyone, including your immediate chain of command. Transportation and temporary duty orders will be arranged. Understood?" I understood that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't yet imagine. The flight to Washington was my first time traveling on official Pentagon business, and everything about the experience felt surreal. A black sedan picked me up at my apartment at 0500 hours and drove me to Nashville International, where I boarded a commercial flight with orders marked classified in red letters across the top. The flight attendant who checked my paperwork looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and respect that I wasn't used to receiving from civilians. The Pentagon itself was overwhelming. Massive corridors filled with officers whose chest ribbons represented careers I could only aspire to. Briefing rooms where decisions affecting global security were made daily, and an energy that crackled with the weight of serious responsibility. I had been on military bases around the world, but nothing had prepared me for the feeling of walking through the nerve center of American defense operations. Colonel Hayes' office was on the 3rd floor of the E-Ring, with windows overlooking the Potomac River and walls covered with photos of her serving in combat zones across 3 different decades. She was a legend in special operations, the first woman to command a Ranger battalion, a Silver Star recipient from Afghanistan, and someone whose reputation for excellence was matched only by her reputation for demanding the same from everyone under her command. "Staff Sergeant Martinez," she said as I reported for duty, "your file makes for interesting reading. 8 years of exemplary service, 2 combat deployments with commendations for leadership under fire, fluent in Arabic and Dari, and a security clearance that most officers twice your age don't possess. Your commanding officers describe you as someone who performs best when the stakes are highest and the mission is most critical." She gestured for me to sit across from her desk, where a thick folder marked "Top Secret" waited with my name typed across the label. "What I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room. 6 months ago, the Secretary of Defense authorized the creation of a new Special Operations Unit designed to handle the most sensitive and dangerous missions in our current theater of operations. We're not talking about conventional warfare or standard counterterrorism operations. We're talking about missions that require surgical precision, cultural understanding, and the ability to operate independently in hostile territory for extended periods. She opened the folder and showed me photographs of targets I recognized from intelligence briefings, high-value terrorists, weapons smuggling networks, and infrastructure that represented critical threats to American interests abroad. This unit will be small, elite, and completely off the books. Personnel will be selected based on demonstrated competence, psychological stability, and the ability to make split-second decisions that affect national security. The selection process is more rigorous than any special operations program currently in existence, and the failure rate is expected to exceed 90%. My heart was pounding, but I kept my expression neutral as she continued. Your name came to my attention through 3 different channels. First, your performance during Operation Desert Shield, where you successfully negotiated the release of 6 American contractors from a terrorist cell without firing a single shot. Second, your intelligence work during your second deployment, where your cultural connections provided information that prevented 2 separate attacks on coalition forces. Third, your language skills and ability to operate effectively in both urban and rural environments across multiple countries. She leaned forward, studying my face for any sign of doubt or hesitation. I'm offering you the opportunity to compete for selection to this unit. If you're selected, you'll spend the next year in the most intensive training program the military has ever developed. If you complete training, you'll be promoted to Sergeant First Class and given responsibilities that most captains never see. If you excel in your initial assignments, you'll be fast-tracked for officer candidate school and potentially command of your own unit within 5 years. The magnitude of what she was describing hit me like a physical force. This wasn't just a career opportunity. It was a chance to serve at the highest levels of military operations, to make decisions that would affect global security, to prove that a girl from Beverly Hills who had been dismissed by her own family could excel in the most demanding environment the military had to offer. There are risks, Colonel Hayes continued, her tone becoming more serious. This unit will operate in the most dangerous areas of the current conflict. Mission success rates are high, but casualty rates are also significant. Personnel selected for this program should understand that they may be deployed for extended periods with minimal contact with family or friends. Some missions may require complete communication blackouts for months at a time. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle between us. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. I need to know if you're interested before I can provide additional details about the selection process. This is not a decision to make lightly, and it's not a program you can leave once you're committed. If you're selected and complete training, you'll be obligated to serve in this capacity for a minimum of 5 years. I thought about my family, sitting in their Beverly Hills mansion discussing my need to find a husband for financial security. I thought about Isabella's diamond bracelet and Marcus's condescending comments about military service being a stepping stone to the real world. I thought about my mother's concerns about my aggressive personality making me unmarriageable, and my father's suggestion that my leadership experience might qualify me for entry-level management positions. Colonel, I'm absolutely interested, I said without hesitation. She smiled for the first time since I had entered her office. I thought you might be. Your psychological profile suggests that you perform best when challenged, and that you have a strong need to prove yourself in high-stakes situations. This program will give you opportunities to do both. The selection process began 2 weeks later at a classified location in Virginia that didn't appear on any map I could find. For 3 months, I endured physical challenges that made basic training look like a warm-up, psychological evaluations that probed every aspect of my personality and decision-making process, and tactical scenarios that required me to demonstrate competence in everything from advanced combat techniques to diplomatic negotiation. Of the 200 soldiers who began the selection process, only 12 completed it. I was one of 3 women, and the only person under the age of 30. The training that followed was even more intense. 6 months of preparation for missions that I couldn't discuss with anyone, including my immediate family. During this period, my communication with my family became sporadic. I told them I was involved in advanced training that required extended periods away from base, which was technically true but didn't begin to describe the reality of what I was doing. They seemed relieved that I was finally taking my career seriously, and stopped asking detailed questions about my assignments. Isabella got engaged to Marcus during my 3rd month of training. I missed the engagement party because I was learning advanced interrogation techniques and studying terrorist network structures. My mother sent me photos from the celebration, along with a note expressing disappointment that I couldn't prioritize family events over my training exercises. 3 weeks before that dinner, where my family discussed my unmarriageability, I had completed my final evaluation and received my new assignment. I was being promoted to Sergeant First Class and assigned to lead a classified operation in Syria that would target a weapons smuggling network responsible for supplying improvised explosive devices to terrorist cells throughout the region. More importantly, I had been selected for an accelerated officer candidate program that would begin immediately after my return from Syria. If I performed well during my initial command assignment, I would be promoted to 2nd lieutenant within 18 months and potentially offered command of my own specialized unit within 3 years. But the biggest secret, the one that would eventually change everything, was still 6 months away. What my family didn't know as they sat in that dining room discussing my need to transition to civilian life was that I had already been identified as a candidate for something that would make their real estate empire and pharmaceutical connections look like children's games. The Pentagon was watching me, evaluating me, and preparing me for responsibilities that would eventually put me in rooms where decisions affecting global security were made daily. While they worried about my ability to attract a suitable husband, I was being groomed for command positions that most career officers never achieved. I just had to survive the next deployment first, complete my mission objectives, and prove that their disappointing daughter was capable of excellence at levels they couldn't even comprehend. The irony was perfect. While they planned Isabella's wedding and discussed my need for male financial support, I was quietly building a career that would eventually make me more powerful than any of their social connections could imagine. The months following that humiliating dinner became a masterclass in strategic silence. I stopped trying to explain my deployments, stopped sharing my achievements, and stopped seeking their approval for choices they would never understand. Instead, I focused on something they had never taught me, but that the military had perfected: the art of calculated preparation. My deployment to Syria began 3 weeks after listening to my family discuss my unmarriageability. The mission was classified at levels that required me to sign documents acknowledging that discussing any aspect of my assignment could result in federal prosecution. What I can say is that it involved leading a 12-person team in operations designed to disrupt weapons trafficking networks that had been supplying terrorist cells across the region for nearly 2 years. The team I commanded included soldiers with more experience than me, higher security clearances than I had previously possessed, and specializations in everything from explosive ordnance disposal to psychological operations. Leading them required a level of competence and confidence that I had been building for 8 years, but had never been fully tested until those 6 months in the Syrian desert. Our operational base was a compound that didn't exist on any official maps, staffed by personnel whose names didn't appear in any military databases, conducting missions that would never be acknowledged by any government official. We operated with autonomy that most colonels never experienced, making real-time decisions that affected regional stability and American interests in ways that my family's business dealings could never approach. The first month was spent establishing intelligence networks among local populations who had been terrorized by the same weapons trafficking organizations we were targeting. This required cultural sensitivity, language skills, and an understanding of regional politics that went far beyond anything taught in conventional military training. I found myself negotiating with tribal leaders, coordinating with international intelligence services, and managing operations that required diplomatic skills as much as military expertise. By the second month, we had identified the primary supply routes being used to transport weapons from manufacturing facilities to distribution points where they were sold to various terrorist organizations. Disrupting these networks required surgical precision. We couldn't simply destroy the facilities without creating power vacuums that might be filled by even worse actors. Instead, we had to carefully dismantle the organizational structures while preserving regional stability. The operation that defined my deployment happened during the 4th month, when we received intelligence about a convoy carrying advanced explosive components that were destined for terrorist cells planning attacks on civilian targets in 3 different countries. The convoy was heavily guarded, traveling through terrain that offered no cover for conventional assault, and operating on a timeline that gave us less than 18 hours to intercept it. I made the decision to use a strategy that combined psychological warfare with precision strikes, leveraging our cultural intelligence to turn the convoy's own security protocols against them. Instead of attacking the convoy directly, we targeted their communication networks and created false intelligence that convinced them they were being pursued by a much larger force than actually existed. The result was that the convoy diverted from its planned route directly into an ambush position we had prepared, allowing us to capture the weapons shipment without firing a single shot and without causing any civilian casualties. The intelligence we gathered from that operation led to the disruption of 17 different terrorist cells and prevented attacks that could have killed hundreds of civilians. 3 weeks later, I received a secure communication that changed everything. Colonel Hayes informed me that my performance in Syria had attracted attention at the highest levels of military command. The Secretary of Defense had personally reviewed my mission reports, and I was being recalled to Washington for what she described as a briefing that will significantly affect your career trajectory. The flight from Syria to Washington gave me 12 hours to process what was happening. I was returning from the most successful deployment of my career, having led operations that had measurably improved American security interests, but I had no idea what kind of recognition or assignment awaited me. All I knew was that my family was planning Isabella's bachelorette party in Napa Valley, and had sent me emails asking if I would be able to attend, completely unaware that I was returning from operations they couldn't even imagine. The briefing at the Pentagon involved people whose names I recognized from news reports about national security policy. The Secretary of Defense was there, along with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the director of the CIA, and several officials whose titles I didn't fully understand but whose presence indicated that whatever was being discussed had implications far beyond normal military operations. Sergeant First Class Martinez, the Secretary of Defense, began, "Your performance in Syria has been exceptional. Not just your tactical competence, but your ability to operate with autonomy, make strategic decisions under pressure, and achieve mission objectives while maintaining diplomatic relationships with allied intelligence services." He gestured to a folder on the conference table that was marked with security classifications I had never seen before. "We are creating a new position within Special Operations Command, something that has never existed before in the history of American military operations. This position will involve command of a multi-service unit that conducts operations requiring the highest levels of security clearance, cultural competence, and strategic thinking." The chairman of the Joint Chiefs took over the briefing. "This isn't just about military tactics, Sergeant Martinez. The threats we face today require leaders who can think like diplomats, operate like intelligence officers, and fight like special forces operators. Your background in international relations, your language skills, and your demonstrated ability to build relationships with foreign nationals make you uniquely qualified for this type of leadership." What they were describing sounded like science fiction, a command position that would involve coordinating operations across multiple countries, working directly with heads of state and intelligence agencies, and making decisions that could affect global security. It was the kind of responsibility that career officers spent decades trying to achieve, and they were offering it to someone who had been in the military for 8 years. "The position requires immediate promotion to captain, followed by accelerated advancement to major within 18 months, the secretary continued. "You would report directly to this office, with operational authority that supersedes the normal chain of command structures. Your decisions would be reviewed only by the Secretary of Defense and the President." The magnitude of what they were offering was almost incomprehensible. This wasn't just a promotion or a new assignment. It was an opportunity to serve at levels of responsibility that most people never imagined existed. While my family worried about my ability to find a husband who could provide financial security, the Pentagon was offering me authority over operations that affected international relations. "There is one condition," the CIA director added. "This position requires complete operational security. Your family, friends, and former colleagues cannot know the specifics of your assignment. As far as anyone outside this room is concerned, you will be assigned to routine administrative duties at the Pentagon. The cover story is necessary to protect both the operations you'll be conducting and your personal security." Perfect. My family already thought my military service was glorified paperwork and bureaucracy. They would have no problem believing that I had been assigned to a desk job in Washington, finally accepting their vision of my career as ordinary government work that required no special recognition. I accepted the position immediately. The ceremony where I was promoted to captain and given my new security clearances took place in a conference room with no windows, attended by people whose names would never appear in any public records. There were no family members present, no photographers, no celebration dinner afterward. Just a quiet acknowledgement that I had achieved something that would reshape my understanding of what service could mean. 3 days later, I called my family to tell them I had been reassigned to the Pentagon for administrative duties. My mother's response was immediate relief that I was finally doing normal military work instead of playing soldier in dangerous places. My father suggested that Pentagon experience would look good on a resume when I eventually decided to transition to civilian employment. Isabella asked if my new assignment would give me more time to help plan her wedding. None of them asked about my promotion to captain. None of them seemed curious about why the Pentagon would select me for any position. None of them understood that while they were planning social events and business deals, I was preparing to take command of operations that would never make headlines but would affect the safety and security of the world they took for granted. That night, I sat in my new apartment near Arlington Cemetery, looking at the captain's bars I couldn't wear in public and the security clearance documents I couldn't share with anyone, and I realized that I had finally achieved something my family's social connections could never buy and their business empire could never match. I had become indispensable to something bigger than their narrow definition of success. I just had to wait 6 more months for them to learn exactly how wrong they had been about everything. The morning I walked through their front door wearing my new Pentagon ID badge, I could have announced that I had just been personally selected by the Secretary of Defense to command the most classified special operations unit in American military history. Instead, I let them continue believing that I was doing paperwork and filing reports while they planned Isabella's wedding and discussed my need to find a suitable husband. The irony was exquisite. While they worried about my unmarketable personality and aggressive military training, I was spending my days in briefing rooms where global security decisions were made, commanding operations that most generals never knew existed, and building relationships with intelligence officials from allied nations, who trusted me with information that could change the course of international relations. My new position came with responsibilities that redefined everything I thought I knew about military service. Each morning, I received briefings on terrorist activities, geopolitical threats, and intelligence operations across 4 different continents. My decisions affected mission planning for units operating in classified locations, resource allocation for operations that didn't officially exist, and strategic coordination between American forces and Allied intelligence services. The unit I commanded was unlike anything in conventional military structure. My personnel included Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Air Force Special Operations Officers, Marine Force Recon Specialists, and CIA operatives whose backgrounds were so classified that I only knew them by operational code names. They reported to me not because of my rank, which was still relatively junior in traditional military hierarchy, but because the Pentagon had determined that my combination of tactical competence, cultural understanding, and strategic thinking made me uniquely qualified to coordinate their diverse specializations. Our operations ranged from precision strikes against high-value targets to complex intelligence-gathering missions that required months of preparation and cultural infiltration. I found myself authorizing missions that could affect the stability of entire regions, coordinating with foreign intelligence services on operations that required diplomatic immunity, and making real-time decisions that had implications for American foreign policy. 3 months into my new assignment, I was summoned to a meeting that changed my understanding of how high my trajectory could actually reach. The meeting took place in a conference room I had never accessed before, deeper in the Pentagon than I had previously been authorized to enter, with participants who included the Secretary of Defense, the National Security Advisor, and the President's Chief of Staff. Captain Martinez, the Secretary of Defense, began, "Your performance over the past year has been exceptional. The operations you've commanded in Syria, the intelligence networks you've developed, and your ability to coordinate multi-service special operations have exceeded every expectation we had when we created your position." The National Security Advisor leaned forward, studying my file with obvious interest. "More importantly, your cultural competence and language skills have proven invaluable in regions where traditional military approaches have failed. The relationships you've built with local intelligence sources have provided information that has prevented terrorist attacks in 7 different countries." What they told me next sounded like something from a spy novel rather than real military planning. The president had authorized the creation of a new command structure that would coordinate special operations across all branches of military service, combining traditional special forces capabilities with intelligence operations and diplomatic initiatives. This new command would report directly to the Secretary of Defense and would have operational authority that transcended normal military hierarchy. "We want you to lead this new command structure," the Chief of Staff said simply. The position would require immediate promotion to major, followed by accelerated advancement to lieutenant colonel within 2 years. You would have operational command over special forces units from all service branches, coordination authority with international intelligence services, and strategic oversight of classified operations in regions where conventional diplomacy has failed. The title they were offering was Commander of Special Forces Integration, a position that had never existed before in American military history. I would be responsible for coordinating operations that combined the tactical capabilities of Navy SEALs, the strategic thinking of Air Force Special Operations, the cultural competence of Army Special Forces, the precision of Marine Force Recon, and the intelligence-gathering expertise of CIA operatives. This position comes with security clearances that exceed those held by most cabinet members, the Secretary continued. You would have access to intelligence that affects national security policy, operational authority over missions that could change the course of international relations, and strategic responsibility for American special operations in regions that most people can't pronounce. They gave me 72 hours to consider the offer and prepare for the security clearance process that would make my previous background investigations look like job applications. During those 3 days, I thought about my family's dinner conversation, where they had dismissed my military service as a stepping stone to real career opportunities. I thought about Isabella's diamond bracelet and Marcus's condescending comments about military discipline. I thought about my mother's concerns that military training had made me too aggressive to attract a suitable husband. Most of all, I thought about the fact that while they were planning wedding celebrations and business expansions, I was being offered command of operations that protected the comfortable world they took for granted. I accepted the position on a Thursday morning in October, exactly 9 months after my family had mocked my career prospects over dinner in their Beverly Hills mansion. The promotion ceremony took place in the Secretary of Defense's private office, with only the people who had authorized the creation of my new position present to witness it. There were no photographers, no family members, no public announcements that would reveal the existence of the command structure I was about to lead. The security clearance process that followed was unlike anything I had previously experienced. Investigators reviewed every aspect of my personal history, interviewed people I had known since childhood, and conducted psychological evaluations that probed my ability to make life-and-death decisions that could affect thousands of people. The process culminated with a polygraph examination that lasted 6 hours and covered questions about my loyalty, my judgment, and my ability to maintain operational security under extreme pressure. When the clearance was approved, I was given access to intelligence files that redefined my understanding of global security threats. I learned about terrorist networks that most government officials didn't know existed, weapons proliferation schemes that could destabilize entire regions, and intelligence operations that were preventing attacks on American soil every week. My first major operation as Commander of Special Forces Integration involved coordinating a multinational response to a terrorist cell that was planning simultaneous attacks in London, Paris, and New York. The operation required coordination between American Special Forces, British SAS, French GIGN, and intelligence services from 6 different countries. Success depended on precise timing, cultural sensitivity, and the ability to maintain operational security across multiple time zones and languages. The operation was successful beyond every expectation. We disrupted the terrorist network without any civilian casualties, captured intelligence that led to the identification of sleeper cells in 12 different countries, and prevented attacks that could have killed thousands of people. The success of this operation established my reputation within international intelligence communities and led to invitations to coordinate similar operations in regions where American interests were threatened. 6 weeks later, I received the call that would change everything with my family. The Secretary of Defense informed me that the President had personally reviewed my performance as Commander of Special Forces Integration and had made a decision that would require another promotion and an even higher level of security clearance. "Captain Martinez," he said, "effective immediately, you are being promoted to Major and designated as the primary liaison between American Special Operations and Allied Intelligence Services. This position will require you to coordinate operations that affect global security policy and to serve as the American representative in international forums, where special operations strategy is discussed." The position came with a title that would make my family's business connections look like children's games: Special Advisor to the Secretary of Defense for Global Operations. I would report directly to the Secretary, coordinate with intelligence services from allied nations, and have operational authority over missions that could affect the foreign policy decisions of multiple countries. Most importantly, this promotion would require a public ceremony where my achievements would be recognized by the highest levels of government and military leadership. After 9 months of operational security and cover stories, I would finally be able to reveal to my family exactly what their disappointing daughter had accomplished while they planned social events and worried about my unmarketability. The ceremony was scheduled for the following month, and I was authorized to invite family members to attend. As I prepared to make those phone calls, I realized that I was about to give my family a masterclass in exactly how wrong they had been about everything they thought they knew about success, achievement, and which daughter had actually been worth their attention all along. The phone call I made to my parents 3 days before the Pentagon ceremony was the first time in 9 months that I had initiated contact with them. Usually, our communication followed the same pattern. They would call or text with updates about Isabella's wedding plans, business developments, or social events, and I would respond with polite acknowledgments and vague updates about my administrative duties at the Pentagon. This time was different. "Mom, I need to let you know that I'm receiving a commendation from the Secretary of Defense next week. You're welcome to attend if you'd like." I kept my tone casual, as if I were inviting them to a routine office party rather than a ceremony recognizing achievements they couldn't begin to comprehend. The silence on the other end of the line lasted long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, my mother's voice came through with a mixture of confusion and skepticism. "A commendation? For what? I thought you were doing paperwork and administrative things." "I've been involved in some special projects that apparently went well. The ceremony is at the Pentagon on Thursday at 1400 hours. Formal attire required." I could hear her covering the phone and having a muffled conversation with my father. When she came back on the line, her tone had shifted from confusion to the kind of forced enthusiasm she used when she was trying to manage potentially embarrassing family situations. "Well, that's wonderful, honey. Your father and I would love to attend. Should we bring Isabella and Marcus? Will there be other families there?" "You can bring whoever you'd like. I'm authorized to invite up to 6 guests." I paused, letting the significance of that number sink in. "I've also invited Colonel Hayes, my former commanding officer, and Major Thompson from my current assignment." The fact that I was inviting military colleagues to a family event was clearly puzzling to her, but she agreed to attend and said she would coordinate with Isabella about their travel arrangements. After I hung up, I realized that I had spent 9 months imagining this moment, but I hadn't fully considered how surreal it would be to watch my family try to process information that contradicted everything they thought they knew about my life. The ceremony took place in the Pentagon's most formal briefing room, the same space where cabinet members received classified briefings and international military leaders met to discuss global security issues. The room was arranged with theater-style seating, facing a podium, where the Secretary of Defense would present awards to 6 different officers from various branches of service. My family arrived exactly on time, which surprised me because punctuality had never been their strength. My father wore his most expensive suit, the one he reserved for meetings with high-net-worth clients. My mother had chosen an outfit that screamed Beverly Hills sophistication, complete with jewelry that probably cost more than most soldiers' annual salaries. Isabella and Marcus looked like they were attending a country club event, polished and perfectly coordinated, but completely out of place in a room full of military personnel and government officials. The contrast between my family and the other attendees was immediately obvious. The other families in the room included spouses of career military officers, parents who had been attending military ceremonies for decades, and children who understood that applause should wait for appropriate moments and conversations should be conducted in whispers. My family, by comparison, looked like tourists who had wandered into the wrong building. Isabella kept taking photos with her phone until a security officer quietly informed her that photography wasn't permitted. Marcus attempted to network with other attendees, not realizing that casual conversation during formal military ceremonies was considered inappropriate. My parents sat stiffly in their seats, clearly uncomfortable with the formal protocol that governed every aspect of the event. The ceremony began with the presentation of the colors and the national anthem, followed by remarks from the Secretary of Defense about the importance of recognizing exceptional service in times of complex global challenges. Each award recipient was called forward individually, and their citations were read aloud before they received their commendations and posed for official photographs. When my name was called, I heard my mother gasp audibly. The citation that was read into the official record described achievements that bore no resemblance to the administrative duties I had been supposedly performing for the past 9 months. Major Jessica Martinez is hereby awarded the Defense Superior Service Medal for exceptionally meritorious service as Commander of Special Forces Integration from October 2023 to September 2024. Major Martinez demonstrated exceptional leadership in coordinating multi-service special operations that directly contributed to the disruption of international terrorist networks, the prevention of attacks against civilian targets in allied nations, and the development of intelligence capabilities that enhanced American national security interests in critical regions. The citation continued with specifics that I watched my family struggle to process. Major Martinez's strategic planning and operational oversight resulted in the successful coordination of classified missions across 4 continents, the establishment of intelligence-sharing protocols with allied nations, and the development of cultural competency standards that improved the effectiveness of American special operations in complex environments. And this the plans. As I walked to the podium to receive the medal from the Secretary of Defense, I could see my family's faces in the audience. My father's expression had shifted from polite attention to genuine shock. My mother looked like she was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Isabella appeared confused, as if the person being honored couldn't possibly be her sister who had been dismissed as unmarriageable just months earlier. Marcus, however, looked like someone who had just realized he had been catastrophically wrong about something important. His face had gone pale, and he kept glancing between me and Isabella as if he were recalculating social equations that no longer balanced the way he had expected. The Secretary of Defense's remarks as he presented the medal were brief but significant. Major Martinez represents the future of American military leadership, officers who combine tactical excellence with strategic thinking, cultural competence with operational effectiveness, and the ability to coordinate complex international operations while maintaining the highest standards of professional competence. After the ceremony, there was a reception where family members could meet with military leadership and learn more about their loved ones' achievements. My family stood in a cluster near the refreshment table, clearly uncertain about how to navigate conversations with generals, intelligence officials, and defense contractors who wanted to discuss my work in terms they didn't understand. Colonel Hayes approached them with the kind of professional courtesy that career military officers use when dealing with civilian families who don't understand military culture. "You must be very proud of Jessica," she said to my parents. "Her work over the past year has been exceptional, even by the standards we expect from special operations personnel." My father, still processing what he had heard during the ceremony, managed to respond with something approaching coherence. "We had no idea she was involved in anything so significant. She told us she was doing administrative work." Colonel Hayes smiled with the patient understanding of someone who had spent decades explaining military operations to confused family members. Administrative work is one way to describe coordination of international special operations. Major Martinez has been modest about her responsibilities, but I can tell you that her work has directly contributed to preventing terrorist attacks that could have killed thousands of civilians. Isabella, who had been unusually quiet throughout the reception, finally found her voice. So when Jessica said she was stationed at the Pentagon doing paperwork, she was coordinating some of the most complex military operations in our current theater of global engagement, Colonel Hayes confirmed. The paperwork involved included intelligence reports that affect national security policy and operational plans that require approval from the Secretary of Defense. I watched my family absorb this information, seeing their understanding of my life rearrange itself in real time. The sister and daughter they had dismissed as playing soldier was actually commanding operations that protected the comfortable world they had taken for granted. The woman they worried was too aggressive to attract a suitable husband, was trusted by the highest levels of government, with responsibilities that most career politicians never achieved. But the best part was still coming. The ceremony had been impressive, but it was only the beginning of what they were about to learn about exactly who they had been underestimating for the past 9 years. The drive from the Pentagon to the restaurant where we were having dinner was the longest 20 minutes of silence I had ever experienced with my family. Isabella sat in the back seat of my father's Mercedes, staring out the window like she was seeing the world for the first time. Marcus kept checking his phone, probably researching military ranks and trying to understand what he had just witnessed. My parents drove in complete quiet, occasionally glancing at each other with expressions that suggested they were having an entire conversation without words. I had chosen the restaurant carefully, a quiet steakhouse in Arlington, frequented by military officers and defense contractors, where the staff understood operational security and conversations about classified work were common enough that nobody paid attention to discussions at neighboring tables. It was the kind of place where my family's designer clothes and obvious wealth would blend in with the clientele, but where the context would reinforce everything they had just learned about my actual career. We were seated at a corner table with enough privacy for the conversation I knew was coming. My father ordered wine without consulting the table, a nervous habit he had developed. Whenever he needed time to process unexpected information, my mother kept rearranging her napkin and checking her reflection in her phone. Behaviors that indicated she was deeply uncomfortable with being uncertain about social dynamics. The silence continued through appetizers, with everyone making polite comments about the food while avoiding the obvious topic that dominated the space between us. Finally, Isabella broke the tension with the directness that had always been her most valuable trait. "Jess, I don't understand what just happened. 6 months ago, you were telling us you were doing administrative work, and today we watched you receive a medal from the Secretary of Defense for commanding international operations. How is that possible?" I had been preparing for this conversation for months, but actually having it felt surreal. The work I've been doing requires operational security. I couldn't discuss the details of my assignments, even with family, so I used cover stories that were technically accurate but didn't reveal classified information. Marcus, who had been unusually quiet since the ceremony, leaned forward with the kind of intensity he usually reserved for business negotiations. "When you said administrative work, you meant coordinating special operations across multiple countries." "Among other things, yes." My father set down his wine glass with the careful precision of someone trying to maintain control of a situation that had moved far beyond his understanding. "Jessica, I need to ask you directly, what exactly do you do for the military?" It was the first time in 9 years that he had asked about my work with genuine interest rather than polite dismissal. The irony wasn't lost on me that it had taken a Pentagon ceremony and a Defense Superior Service Medal to generate curiosity about the career they had been dismissing as a phase. I command special operations units that conduct classified missions in regions where conventional military approaches aren't effective. My work involves coordinating between different branches of the military, allied intelligence services, and diplomatic initiatives. The operations I oversee are designed to prevent terrorist attacks, disrupt weapons trafficking networks, and gather intelligence that affects national security policy. The explanation was simplified for operational security reasons, but it was accurate enough to help them understand that their assumptions about my work had been completely wrong. I watched their faces as they processed information that contradicted years of dismissive comments about my career choices. My mother, who had spent months worrying about my ability to attract a suitable husband, spoke with the careful tone of someone trying to navigate unfamiliar territory. When you were deployed to Syria, you weren't just serving in a regular capacity. I was commanding a specialized unit conducting operations that I still can't discuss in detail. What I can tell you is that the work we did prevented terrorist attacks in multiple countries and provided intelligence that led to the disruption of weapons networks throughout the region. Isabella, who had always been perceptive about social dynamics, was beginning to understand the broader implications of what she was learning. So when we were discussing your need to find a husband for financial security, you were actually commanding operations that most generals never see? That's accurate. The silence that followed was different from the uncomfortable quiet in the car. This was the silence of people recalibrating their understanding of reality, processing information that required them to completely revise their assumptions about someone they thought they knew completely. Marcus, whose comments about military service being a stepping stone to the real world had been particularly condescending, cleared his throat with obvious discomfort. Jessica, I owe you an apology. I made comments about military careers that were completely inappropriate, especially given what I understand now about your actual responsibilities. It was the first genuine apology I had received from any of them in 9 years, and it came from the person whose opinion I valued least. The timing was perfect. Too late to matter for my career decisions, but early enough to reveal exactly how their attitudes had shifted now that they understood the reality of my achievements. My father, who had spent years suggesting that my military experience would qualify me for entry-level management positions, was struggling with the cognitive dissonance between his assumptions and the facts he had just learned. When you told us you were stationed at the Pentagon, I assumed it was some kind of clerical position. I had no idea you were working at levels that require security clearances and strategic planning. I understand why you made those assumptions. Most people don't realize that military service includes responsibilities that affect international relations and global security. The work isn't always visible to people outside the defense community. Isabella, who had always been honest about her feelings even when they were unflattering, looked directly at me with an expression I had never seen before. Jess, I'm embarrassed about how we've treated your career. We've been talking about you like you were wasting your potential, when you've actually been achieving things that most people can't even imagine. The acknowledgement was gratifying, but it also highlighted something that had taken me years to understand. Their dismissal of my achievements had never been about my actual performance or potential. It had been about their inability to comprehend forms of success that didn't fit their narrow definitions of achievement and status. My mother, who had expressed concerns about military training making me too aggressive for civilian relationships, was beginning to understand that my position required diplomatic skills as much as tactical competence. The work you're doing involves coordination with foreign officials and international organizations? Yes. A significant portion of my responsibilities involves building relationships with allied intelligence services and coordinating operations that require cultural sensitivity and diplomatic immunity. The conversation continued for another hour, with my family asking questions that revealed how completely wrong their assumptions had been about every aspect of my military service. They had imagined me following orders and filling out paperwork, when I had actually been giving orders and making strategic decisions. They had worried about my ability to transition to civilian leadership roles, when I had been commanding operations that required more strategic thinking than most corporate executives ever develop. But the most significant revelation was still ahead of them. The ceremony they had just attended and the medal I had received were recognition for work I had already completed. What they didn't know was that 3 weeks earlier I had received news that would make today's achievements look like preliminary qualifications for something much bigger. The Pentagon was preparing to announce a new position that would change everything they thought they understood about military leadership, and I was about to become the first person in American history to hold a title that would make their business connections and social status look like children's games. 3 weeks after that dinner where my family finally understood the magnitude of their miscalculations, I received the phone call that would make their newfound respect look like a warm-up for the main event. The call came on a Monday morning while I was reviewing intelligence reports in my office at the Pentagon, and the voice on the other end belonged to someone whose name I had only heard in classified briefings about the highest levels of national security planning. Major Martinez, this is General Patricia Kellerman, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I need you in my office in 30 minutes for a discussion that will significantly affect your career trajectory and the future structure of American military operations. General Kellerman was a legend whose reputation extended far beyond military circles. She was the first woman to serve as chairman of the Joint Chiefs, a four-star general who had commanded operations in 3 different theaters of conflict, and someone whose strategic thinking had influenced defense policy for 2 decades. The fact that she was calling me directly, rather than working through normal chain-of-command protocols, indicated that whatever we were about to discuss was both urgent and highly classified. Her office occupied the most secure floor of the Pentagon, with windows that overlooked the Potomac River and walls lined with photographs documenting American military operations spanning 50 years. When I reported for duty, she was reviewing documents marked with security classifications I had never seen before, and the conference table was set for a meeting that clearly involved more participants than just the 2 of us. Major Martinez, what I'm about to discuss with you cannot leave this room without specific authorization from the President's National Security Council. The information you're about to receive affects strategic planning at the highest levels of government and requires security protocols that exceed your current clearance level. She gestured for me to sit across from her, where a folder marked, "Eyes Only, Presidential Authorization Required," waited with my name typed across a label that indicated this briefing had been specifically prepared for me. 6 months ago, the President authorized a comprehensive review of American special operations capabilities in response to evolving global threats that require coordination between military forces, intelligence services, and diplomatic initiatives. The review concluded that current command structures are inadequate for addressing threats that cross traditional boundaries between military operations, intelligence gathering, and international relations. She opened the folder to reveal organizational charts that showed a completely new command structure, unlike anything in the current military hierarchy. At the top of the chart was a position I had never seen before: Commander of Special Forces, Global Operations. The President has authorized the creation of a new command position that will coordinate special operations across all branches of military service, all intelligence agencies, and selected diplomatic initiatives. This position will report directly to the Secretary of Defense and the President, with operational authority that supersedes traditional chain-of-command structures. What she was describing sounded like something from a strategic planning exercise, rather than real military organization. The Commander of Special Forces would have authority over Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Air Force Special Operations, Marine Force Recon, CIA operatives, NSA intelligence specialists, and diplomatic security personnel. It was a level of coordination that had never been attempted in American military history. The person selected for this position will be responsible for operations that affect global security policy, strategic coordination with allied nations, and tactical planning for missions that could change the course of international relations. The position requires someone with demonstrated competence in special operations, proven ability to coordinate with international partners, and the strategic thinking necessary to make decisions that affect national security. She paused, studying my face for any sign of doubt or overwhelm, then continued with words that changed everything I thought I knew about the trajectory of my career. Major Martinez, the President has personally reviewed your service record, your performance as Commander of Special Forces Integration, and the recommendations from everyone who has worked with you over the past 2 years. You are being offered the position of Commander of Special Forces Global Operations, effective immediately. The magnitude of what she was offering was almost incomprehensible. This wasn't just a promotion or a new assignment. It was an opportunity to reshape American military operations at the highest levels of strategic planning. The position would make me responsible for coordinating operations that affected international relations, global security policy, and the safety of American interests worldwide. The position requires immediate promotion to lieutenant colonel, with scheduled advancement to colonel within 18 months. You would have operational command over Special Forces personnel from all service branches, strategic oversight of intelligence operations in critical regions, and coordinating authority with allied military leaders and intelligence services. She showed me operational plans that involved coordination with military forces from NATO countries, intelligence sharing agreements with allied nations, and strategic planning for missions that would never appear in any public military reports. The scope of responsibility was unlike anything I had imagined possible for someone with my level of experience. There is one additional aspect of this position that makes it unique in American military history, General Kellerman continued. The commander of Special Forces will serve as the primary military advisor to the president on matters involving special operations, with direct access to the Oval Office and regular participation in National Security Council meetings. Direct access to the president. Regular participation in meetings where foreign policy decisions were made. Strategic input on operations that could affect the course of history. It was the kind of responsibility that career generals spent decades trying to achieve, and they were offering it to someone who had been dismissed by her own family as playing soldier just 2 years earlier. The position comes with security clearances that exceed those held by most cabinet members, operational authority that transcends normal military hierarchy, and strategic responsibility for American special operations worldwide. You would coordinate with heads of state, intelligence directors from allied nations, and diplomatic officials whose work affects international relations. The ceremony where this appointment would be announced was scheduled for the following month, and unlike the previous ceremony my family had attended, this one would be covered by national media, attended by congressional leadership, and broadcast live from the Pentagon's most formal briefing room. Major Martinez, I need your answer today. This position cannot remain vacant, and the strategic planning required for your transition to this level of responsibility must begin immediately. I thought about my family, sitting in that Arlington restaurant 3 weeks earlier, trying to process the revelation that their disappointing daughter had been commanding international operations while they planned social events and worried about my unmarketability. I thought about Isabella's diamond bracelet and Marcus's comments about military service being a stepping stone to real careers. I thought about my mother's concerns that military training had made me too aggressive to attract a suitable husband. Most of all, I thought about the years I had spent trying to earn their respect, seeking their approval, hoping that someday my achievements would be enough to make them proud. Now I was being offered a position that would make their business empire and social connections look like amateur hour, and their opinion of my choices had become completely irrelevant to my success. General Kellerman, I accept the position. The promotion ceremony was scheduled for exactly 4 weeks later, and I was authorized to invite family members to witness the moment when their former disappointment would become the youngest person in American history to command special operations at the global level. This time, I wasn't going to give them any advance warning about what they were about to witness. The invitation I sent to my family was deliberately understated. The Pentagon is hosting another ceremony next month. You're welcome to attend if you're available. Same dress code as before. I included the date, time, and security procedures, but I offered no details about the significance of the event or my role in it. After years of their dismissive comments about my military service, I wanted them to discover the magnitude of my achievement in real time, without preparation or preconceived expectations. Isabella called 2 days after receiving the invitation, her voice carrying the careful tone she used when she was trying to gather information without appearing overly curious. Jess, is this another commendation ceremony like the last one? Should we expect something similar? It's a military ceremony at the Pentagon, I replied with deliberate vagueness. The details are in the invitation. Security will be tighter than last time, so arrive early for processing. What I didn't tell her was that this ceremony would be fundamentally different from the intimate award presentation they had witnessed 3 weeks earlier. This event would be held in the Pentagon's largest briefing room, attended by congressional leadership, covered by national media, and broadcast live on multiple news networks. The guest list included cabinet members, foreign military attachés, and intelligence officials from allied nations. Most importantly, this wasn't a ceremony recognizing past achievements. It was the official announcement of my appointment to a position that would reshape American military operations and make me the youngest person in history to command special operations at the global level. The morning of the ceremony, I arrived at the Pentagon 3 hours early for final briefings with General Kellerman and the Secretary of Defense. The briefing room was already buzzing with activity. As media crews set up cameras, security personnel conducted final sweeps, and protocol officers reviewed seating arrangements for an audience that included some of the most powerful people in American government and military leadership. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez, General Kellerman said as she reviewed the ceremony script, "Today marks a historic moment in American military operations. The position you're accepting has never existed before, and your appointment represents a fundamental shift in how we approach global security challenges." The ceremony would begin with remarks from the Secretary of Defense about evolving threats and the need for innovative command structures, followed by the President's live video address announcing the creation of the new position. My appointment would be announced by the President personally, followed by the reading of my official orders and the presentation of insignia for my new rank and position. "The media coverage will be extensive," the Secretary of Defense warned. "This story will be covered by every major news outlet, and your appointment will likely generate significant public interest. Are you prepared for that level of visibility?" I was. After years of operational security and cover stories, I was ready for my family and the world to understand exactly what I had achieved. My family arrived 90 minutes before the ceremony, dressed in their finest clothes but clearly unprepared for the scale of the event they were about to witness. I watched them through security monitors as they passed through multiple checkpoints, submitted to background verification, and received security badges that indicated their clearance for attendance at a presidential-level military ceremony. Isabella kept looking around the Pentagon corridors with obvious amazement, apparently realizing for the first time that her sister worked in a building where history was made daily. Marcus appeared nervous in a way I had never seen before, as if he were beginning to understand that his dismissive comments about military service had been catastrophically misinformed. My parents moved through the security process with the careful attention of people who recognized they were entering a world where their usual social advantages were irrelevant. The briefing room was filled to capacity when the ceremony began. Congressional leaders occupied the front rows, followed by cabinet members, military leadership from all service branches, and foreign military attachés whose presence indicated the international significance of the position being announced. My family was seated in a section reserved for immediate relatives of the honoree, surrounded by people whose understanding of military operations far exceeded anything they had previously encountered. The ceremony opened with full military honors, the presentation of colors, the national anthem, and remarks from the Secretary of Defense that established the historical significance of what the audience was about to witness. "Today marks the creation of a new position in American military leadership," the Secretary began. "In response to evolving global threats that require unprecedented coordination between military operations, intelligence services, and diplomatic initiatives, the President has authorized the establishment of the Commander of Special Forces Global Operations." I watched my family's faces as the Secretary described the scope of responsibilities that came with this new position: coordination of special operations across all service branches, strategic oversight of intelligence operations worldwide, and direct advisory access to the President on matters of national security. This position represents the highest level of special operations command in American military history, with authority that transcends traditional hierarchical structures and responsibility for operations that affect global security policy. The video screen at the front of the room activated, showing the presidential seal, followed by live footage from the Oval Office. The President appeared on screen, speaking directly to the audience assembled in the Pentagon briefing room. "The threats facing America today require military leadership that combines tactical excellence with strategic vision, cultural competence with operational effectiveness, and the ability to coordinate complex international operations while maintaining the highest standards of professional competence." My heart was pounding as the President continued, but I kept my expression neutral as cameras captured every moment of the historic announcement. After extensive review of candidates from across all service branches, I am pleased to announce the appointment of Lieutenant Colonel Jessica Martinez as the first Commander of Special Forces Global Operations. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez brings to this position a combination of combat experience, strategic thinking, and international operational success that makes her uniquely qualified to lead American special operations in an era of complex global challenges. The applause that followed was thunderous, but I was focused on my family's reaction. Isabella's mouth was literally hanging open. Marcus looked like he was having difficulty processing what he had just heard. My parents sat in stunned silence, as if the president's words were in a language they didn't understand. When I was called forward to receive my orders and new insignia, the president's video address continued with details about my background that my family was hearing for the first time: successful command of classified operations across multiple continents, strategic coordination with allied intelligence services, and tactical innovations that had prevented terrorist attacks and saved civilian lives. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez represents the future of American military leadership, officers who understand that protecting our nation requires not just courage and tactical skill, but the ability to think strategically about global challenges and work effectively with international partners. As I stood at attention while General Kellerman read my official orders and pinned the insignia of my new position on my uniform, I could see my family in the audience, finally understanding that the daughter and sister they had dismissed as playing soldier was actually making history at the highest levels of American military leadership. The ceremony concluded with the presentation of a framed commission signed by the President, authorizing me to command special operations worldwide and serve as primary military advisor on matters affecting global security. The document represented authority that most career generals never achieved, and responsibility that would affect international relations for years to come. During the reception that followed, foreign military attachés approached me to discuss coordination opportunities, congressional leaders asked about strategic priorities for the new command, and media representatives requested interviews about the historic nature of my appointment. Meanwhile, my family stood near the refreshment table, looking like visitors from another planet who had accidentally wandered into a gathering of people whose world they couldn't begin to understand. The comfortable superiority they had maintained for years through their business success and social connections had evaporated completely, replaced by the humbling realization that they had been living under the same roof as someone whose achievements made their accomplishments look ordinary. But the most satisfying moment came when Isabella approached me near the end of the reception, her eyes filled with something I had never seen there before: genuine respect mixed with profound regret. "Jess," she said quietly, "I need to apologize for everything. We never understood who you really were or what you were capable of achieving. We were wrong about everything." It was the acknowledgement I had waited 9 years to hear, and it came exactly when their opinion no longer mattered to my sense of self-worth or professional success. 6 months later, I'm writing this from my office in the Pentagon, where the walls are lined with photos from operations that changed the course of history, operations that my family still doesn't fully understand, but no longer questions. The same people who once worried about my unmarketability now brag to their country club friends about their daughter, the commander, though they still can't pronounce half the countries where I deploy my teams. Isabella sends me articles about my work that appear in national security publications, usually with messages like, "I saw this and thought of you," as if she's just discovering that her sister exists in a world beyond their Beverly Hills bubble. My parents attend military events now, having learned to navigate Pentagon receptions with the same social skills they once used for charity galas. But the real change isn't in how they see me, it's in how I see myself. I sleep in a bed I chose, in an apartment that smells like fresh starts, instead of expectations. My security clearance opens doors to rooms where decisions affecting millions of people are made daily. My teams trust me with their lives because I've proven worthy of that trust through competence, not compliance. The girl who once begged for approval from people who saw her as a disappointment now advises the president on matters of global security. The woman they worried couldn't attract a suitable husband now coordinates with world leaders who respect her expertise and judgment. I'm not angry anymore. I'm free. Free from needing their validation, free from living down to their expectations, and free to build a legacy that matters beyond their narrow definition of success. Sometimes the people who underestimate you do you the greatest favor of all. They force you to become strong enough to succeed without them. If this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what family expectations you've had to overcome. Your story matters, and you're stronger than anyone who's ever doubted you.